Hello, champions of the internet. I'm here to talk about the progression of Star Wars: The Old Republic, which I will abbreviate as SWToR for short in the text below. There will be spoilers up to and including modern content, so if you don't want the endgame or various other class storylines to be spoiled, I recommend you come back to this video later. You have been warned. Just as some quick backdrop as to what kind of experience I am taking into this conversation. So to start, I've played the game since the first week prior to the game's launch with its early access program. I leveled ridiculously fast and was level 50 within the first 4 or 5 days, and I was, in fact, among one of the first few 5 or 6 max level players within that week on my server. Aside from a month or two of a hiatus during the McKeb and just before the Revan storyline, I pretty much remained a subscriber for the majority of the game's lifespan, so I've been around the block. Now let's get to it. A lot of veterans of SWToR will remember that the game essentially played like Blizzard's World of Warcaft, with a Star Wars overlay on it. This made the game incredibly easy to play for newcomers who were already familiar with WoW's interface. However, there was a slight twist: personal storyline. SWToR has 8 classes, 4 on each faction, all of whom have their own unique storyline up to level 50. The personal storyline essentially followed you throughout the span of the entire release, ending the level cap and your story at about the same time, depending on how you managed your experience while leveling. To kind of make this like a family tree, imagine, if you will, that SWToR sits at the top of the pyramid in terms of story. You have one big storyline, Star Wars. That storyline then splits off into 2 factions, Republic and Empire. You have your planetary arcs, side quests, and overall arcs, fueled by operations and flashpoints, that differ per planet for each faction. Now imagine that both factions split off into 4 different storylines each, one for every class on each faction. Now, while the 4 of the 8 classes are essentially remodeled versions of the other, their storyline and their companion characters remain different. So, if you put it into perspective, you paid the same amount of money for a video game as you would for a single story, but now you have a total of 10 different storylines that you can experience, 4 per faction, along the 2 factions' overarching story that changes from planet to planet. That's more than a worthy selling point if you ask me. 10 storylines, and then you have a grand total of 40 companion characters that each have their own little quips, backgrounds, and conversations that you can explore. That's absolutely brilliant, that is. Delving deeper into the classes, every single class had 5 unique companions, not including your personal droid that each faction shared, that were tied to your storyline in very intricate ways. For example, the Sith Warrior's entire first act dealt with finding Jace Wilson, a powerful Force user that eventually becomes your companion, one who is romanceable to male characters, I should add. Kira Carson for the Jedi Knight, also romanceable to men, is immediately introduced into your prologue sequence, and she becomes your companion very early on, and has pivotal moments in the class campaign that requires her presence for the story to continue. In the same way that the original Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, abbreviated KOTOR 1/2, had your companion characters intricate to the story by giving them each a voice and a powerful moment, so does SWToR have companion characters that had special moments where they shined or were important as characters. One of the things that drew me to SWToR, aside from the fact that it was a Star Wars MMO that I was already interface savvy with, was the fact that it was considered a far sequel to the original KOTOR series, which I loved when I was younger. That, added to the fact that SWToR was essentially a story-driven MMO, made me more than eager to hop on the loud, fanboy-fueled bandwagon into its release. Now, the game did obviously have some hiccups on its initial release. There were only 2 operations, a dozen flashpoints, some shared, others unique to each faction, and a few player versus player imbalances, and of course several bugs, glitches, and other kinks that had to be worked out. But I still found it a charming game. I enjoyed playing through all the class campaigns, seeing everyone's individual storylines, and enjoying the Easter eggs with the nods and references to the other classes, and seeing all the different backgrounds that the companion characters had. In the last decade alone, I've played almost every single BIoware game that has been released. Specifically, I played both the Mass Effect and the Dragon Age series to their full extent. In both of these games, one of the things that I loved, aside from the epic storylines, were the companions. After coming back to the main base, if you would, after a long main quest or side quest grind, I loved sitting down and talking to the various companions and listening to what they had to say about themselves, their past, or me. Bonus points if their opinion of me changed throughout the course of the game's events. In the same way that I enjoyed those single-player games, so too did I enjoy SWToR for its very similar structure in terms of a BIoware game. On a side note, one thing to keep in mind while going forward in this video is that the original loot system for PvP was an RNG-based system. You had to farm combinations to buy boxes that may or may not have had the gear that you wanted. In addition to sweating nervously with that open right-click for a new piece of gear, you also had a chance to loot something that you already owned or had upgraded from. This was especially annoying for the Tier 3 Battlemaster boxes, which did not always contain the very sought-after Battlemaster commendations. Keep this in mind for later on, because we're going to get back to it. Now, with the original structure of the game in mind, where did it start to go wrong? At its peak and launch, SWToR hit 2.5 million subscribers, which was quite impressive. Unfortunately, I don't have a chart to give you about subscriber launches, despite my trying, but I vividly recall that during the release of SWToR, it hit at or around 2.5 million within the first month or two. What I believe started to derail SWToR, aside from the obvious that most of the original creation staff was fired or laid off, was also the remaining developers started to become lazy. Now, this is where the illusion of choice begins to come in to play, and where the turnaround progression begins to trickle in. With the release of Rise of the Hutt Cartel, which didn't make any sense as a title, by the way, as the Hutt Cartel did not rise, it was already established when we arrived on Mekeb, you could already see a drastic decrease in story quality, character quality, and companion quality. Remember that branch of storylines that I mentioned earlier? How it split off into 8 different personal storylines that forced you to play each class to experience what they had to offer? Imagine now taking all 8 storylines and funneling them into 2 small pipes. One for Republic and one for Empire. Instead of keeping to unique class storylines where your choices mattered, they no longer did. Everyone on each faction was given the same exact objective when it came to the Mekeb storyline. The only thing that differed was your origin, where your respective faction leaders would give nods to who or what you were before the start of the expansion, but that was it. The Mekeb storyline delivered a very simplistic content that needed to fulfill a purpose of bringing 2 factions to the same world and giving a reason for both factions to come back and continue to fight and complete objectives on this planet. Bravo! That was done, but poorly. At the end of the companions' conversations, all of them affirmed to defending your legacy because of their respect for you. Your companions made promises to defend you and yours until the end of your days, regardless of whatever prior decisions you made with them. Then that was it. There was no more conversation. Some of your companions, but not all, had quips about the environment here and there, but you could never sit down and talk with them ever again. Everything was said and done. But unfortunately, this is a very familiar formula when it comes to BIoware games. You see, they all suffer from what I call DLC tunnel vision. In short, BIoware focuses on delivering a focal point of new content that drives the game forward, that they forget to look back and see all those they had left behind. The only exception of this, to my knowledge, is Mass Effect 3's Citadel DLC, where it gives true focus on all your companions, both those who follow you on your missions and those who no longer battle alongside you, but once did in prior games or events. It was the only expansion that has, so far, remembered that people other than the main characters and their antagonist exist. Mekeb is where choices started to die. It did not matter who you were before the Mekeb conflict. It did not matter if you sided against your faction or stayed loyal. You were roped into the same event regardless of what you may or may not have done in the past. I will not be including Galactic Starfighter or Galactic Strongholds in this discussion because they do not pertain to any contribution of the expanding story arcs. Now, Shadow of Revan is where there was a slight change to the Mekeb formula. Shadow of Revan, abbreviated SWToR, and its Prelude questline offered a host of new characters to introduce your character into the conflict. Of course, it suffered from a laziness of the flashpoints that led you into the story, being that 2 of them were direct flips of one another for either faction, but it served its purpose. SWToR brought back nods to your original storyline in the classic game. You had one or two side quests that your companions participated in, rather than being diminutive servants that followed meekly in the shadow of your glory. Not all companion characters had a say, but characters from your original storyline did make appearances that reminded you of the good old times where Empire and Republic were at each other's throats. But these slight side departures were just a minor distraction from the new force-fed tube that was SWToR's storyline. The only redeeming factor for some people in this expansion was that Revan made a return and that incredibly obvious nods were made to the original KOTOR game, Rakata Prime, Manan, which we all loved, and to some extent Yavin. But the return of Revan still did not sit well in a lot of players, such as myself, who believed that the character should have been left to die in the vanilla SWToR story. Now, Knights of the Eternal Empire, abbreviated KOT, brought back our true and main villain, the Sith Emperor, Valkorion, Vitiate, Tenebra, etc. Except that instead of having his own host of loyal or mindless followers, he had an entire empire hidden away in another sect of the galaxy waiting to be unleashed. He commanded an unstoppable fleet of ships, an entire other army, and decided to hold it off on using them for why exactly? I won't get too philosophical with why an entire army was put on hold, but I still question the purpose of it. KOT, once again, followed the exact same formula as SWToR. It fed everyone into the same exact storyline. Your choices did not matter, your background did not matter, and now especially your companions did not matter. You lose everyone you had recruited and now are forced to play through a 19-chapter storyline, and you only get some of them back throughout the course of the story. While it was nice for nods to be given to who you were, and Valkorion made some nods to your companions, it was shameful to play a storyline that decided to completely exclude almost half of the people that you fought alongside. Your character recruits various companions from other classes into this singular jumble. Some characters get more than one companion back, others just get the one. Many more you could recruit outside of the main storyline, but they delivered no impactful appearance other than standing around your coalition hub base. Knights of the Eternal Throne, abbreviated KOTET, is simply Season 2, and I put that in quotes, of the previous expansion, a decision that I think was ludicrous. Why introduce an entirely new expansion for the same conflict that's been happening? Makeb was an entire expansion dedicated to itself. SWToR was an entire expansion dedicated to itself. Why was the Zakuulian conflict split? To me, it made no sense other than to hold the breath of the fan base. But moving on. KOTET finally concludes the Zakuulian storyline that ends with the same punchline, the Eternal Alliance. Valkorion, the Great Sith Emperor, is finally defeated inside of your character's mind/dream/soul sequence with the help of Vaylin, Arkan, and Senya, regardless of what your choices might have been, whether to kill or spare them, and thus brings us the illusion of choice full circle. The original SWToR had true choice, where your decisions mattered because they built up upon each other throughout the course of the story. Sparing someone's life who was a part of your personal campaign often resulted in seeing them return later, either to thank you or chastise you. Certain story arcs, although not all, gave you impactful choices about what to do with certain items or people, although the choices never really carried over into future content. The only impactful choice-focused conflict was your personal campaign. But once Makeb launched, choice became an illusion. Yes, BIoware clearly gave you the ability to kill or spare someone, to take a bribe or not, to let innocents die or to save them, but while you did these things, made these choices, the results were only short-term. At the end of KOT, you have a choice to kill or spare a fleeing Senya and Arkan. It doesn't matter what you do because they get away anyway, and you see them in the beginning of the KOTET expansion still asking you for help. Now, it doesn't matter if you kill or spare Senya in there because she'll be removed from the storyline until the very end, where she'll make a miraculous return to help you in your fight against Valkorion. The only impactful choice in all of KOTET was the choice between saving Vet or Torian. Why these two, I'll never know. Because the other you fail to save will die, no question. All other choices throughout the whole of KOTET and KOT led to the same conclusion, with the same conflict, and the same result. SWToR did not have any choices whatsoever that were impactful to the story. In the end, you fought Revan with the help of 8 other main characters. No matter what you said or did beforehand would lead you to a different conflict. Additionally, many companion characters that you did not regain as part of the Ko-Tet or Ko-Ti storyline still remain waiting to be rediscovered. Jaisa Wilsum, Kira Carson, for example, these romanceable companions that you have been holding out for have not made an appearance. Certain players who have fallen in love with these characters are holding back certain decisions on the hopes that their love interests will return. Cinematically, although Ko-Ti and Ko-Tet have been visually strong and emotionally impactful, they have not catered well to all classes. Non-Force users like the Agent, Hunter, Trooper, or Smuggler spam fire their weapons during conversational duels with other players. Rather than engaging in epic lightsaber-on-lightsaber fights that is often seen with Force users, you instead get to see Arkin or Valen getting punked out by someone who can aim and squeeze their finger very quickly. It's rather shameful to see this supposed emperor or empress getting their ass handed to them by someone who just keeps squeezing his trigger, praying that he gets a proper shot. Compared to the lightsaber duel, there is no rush or exhilaration watching someone spraying and praying. Drawing back to vanilla SWToR, some of your choices changed who you encountered, especially towards the end. A light-sided agent could become a double agent for the Republic. A light-sided bounty hunter could fight his own contractor instead of killing the former Chancellor of the Republic. Not all the characters had different conflicts or endgame changes, but those who did had a better story because of it. When giving the option of choice to a player, you must assume that their choice will change the game around them. Having Arkin join you or fight you after failing or succeeded in quote-unquote cleansing him of his rage hardly constitutes as an impactful choice when at the end of the game he serves the same purpose against an end boss. An impactful choice would mean altering the endgame of your story. Instead of fighting Valkorion with the aid of his children and wife, you instead fight Valkorion alone, because you are so selfish and vindictive, and you cut such a swath of destruction that you were left to fight the world's greatest entity on your lonesome, and somehow you succeeded, if you succeeded at all. The power of choice, rather than the illusion of choice, would mean altering storylines that not everyone would experience given the same circumstances. Shooting the shuttle at the end of Ko-Ti to kill Senya and Arkin, only to have them escape, means that you have given an illusion of choice. Shooting and destroying the shuttle, however, gives actual power to the player, and instead of starting Ko-Tet with, "We're locating Senya and Arkin," you instead start it with, "We're taking the fight to Valen and are on the offensive." Aside from the funneled storylines and similar outcomes, the lack of nods to the other characters that existed in your original story is also bothersome. While you may not hear much from the dead, then again this is Star Wars, so death doesn't really seem to stop people from talking and walking around, hearing from the living, especially those you spared, could be an interesting twist on your attitude or that of your character. And I don't mean some in-game mail that anyone can just access whenever they wish, but I mean physically finding and interacting with someone that you haven't seen since you were level 12. It feels as though when BIoware tries to add content onto something they've already created, they fail to recognize what they've already completed and only decide to add onto what is new. While this is the textbook definition of progression, it does not cater well to those players who have fallen in love with what they already know and have to say goodbye to what has become familiar with them. Ever since the launch of McKeb, choice in SWToR has been a falsehood. Your choices do not matter for long, because by the time you reach the end of the story, nothing you have decided to do has changed or impacted you in the long run, save for netting you a couple of light side or dark side points. If you want decisions to matter, if you want choices to be impactful, you must create scenarios that will diverge away from the what-if question. Sparing or killing a character should not only change the way they look at the player, but change the way they would interact with your story. Bringing them back later only to be given the same exact option is not progression, but delayed regression. Now, if you recall, I mentioned earlier that the original PvP system was RNG based. Well, now that is how you gear up in SWToR. Instead of working within a field of activity for your gear, PvPers getting PvP gear, for example, you can now PvP your a heart out, and with the right amount of luck, gear yourself for PvP. This is the new command stash system that encourages players to grind for new upgrades to their equipment to take to the fields of battle. While this frees up the nuisance of players who want to dabble in all fields of the game aspects, this also forces players to fall into a rhythm of work that does not often guarantee a usable reward, and then increases the time and difficulty with each moment they hold their breath in the hopes that their newest container will give them loot that is worthwhile. Laziness is no excuse. Star Wars is an incredibly popular franchise, and there are a lot of people still loyal to the game on the simple basis that it is Star Wars, similar to that of Star Wars Galaxies, where players remain loyal because of the franchise logo, not because of the gameplay or any of the mechanics of it. Budget, while an acceptable excuse, should still be pushed to its limit to try and deliver a meaningful and impactful story. I miss the construct held by the original SWToR, where your choices mattered in your personal and unique story, and companion characters added their voices to your conversation. Playing through the same content with a different character loses its charm after the second or third time. There are only so many ways I can fight Arkin and watch the ensuing conversation before I get bored, and the achievement system late in the game encourages you to play to the game's end 8 or more times. However, playing through a game's story that is different depending on the class that I choose gives a much higher replay rate. If BIoware continues with this formula of delivering content that has the same result regardless of the choices you make, I do not see a bright future for this game, especially given the new way to upgrade yourself is to just keep playing and praying until you get the box that has exactly what you need, rather than working your way up to a goal that you can see and know that you can achieve. Thank you for watching, reading, and I hope that I've given you something to consider for the future. And as always, may the Force be with you.